examine the institution of Christianity, examine the institution of any religion, and say what no longer serves us. And I know that there are people that want to be in this conversation. And there are people that don't want to be in this conversation. They're like, no, there's nothing that needs to be changed. We're okay. And I know that there are people that are looking for another way to practice their spirituality because they feel conflicted with some of the ideas. Now, some people are at peace. They figured out for themselves what they believe, what they don't believe, but maybe they don't have a communal place to go. There's an outcast that happens when you don't belong to the dialogue that everyone else is speaking. Everyone believes that this is the way it is, and you have another opinion. So if you're in that situation, what do I suggest you do? I suggest you try to find people that are going to be able to support you. Hello, gorgeous. Welcome to another episode of the Spiritual Rebel podcast, where I'm going to deep dive everything that we need to be thinking about when we're looking towards creating a more powerful spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical well being for humanity. One of the things I'm so passionate about is talking about authentic self expression. It took me a while to decide to do this podcast because honestly, I was scared of the backlash. I was scared that the topic of religion would bring out the beast in lots of people. And I just wasn't sure if I was ready to deal with what some people might feel about what I have to say. But I finally got the courage to speak my truth. And I know that there are many people that will be helped by this. And I know that there are many people that will be triggered by this, and I'm okay with that. But it took me a while to get comfortable with, Mahima, tell your story. I'm not here to convince anyone about anything. I'm just here to invite the conversation of how can humans be better. As some of you know, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic. And that literally meant going to church every Sunday and being programmed as a Christian about what it means to be a woman, about the Bible, my relationship with the divine, and all of that stuff. In my family, we've had a lot of pain, a lot of anger, I would say, a lot of emotional drama, roller coasters. And I think this is pretty standard in most families. So I don't think I'm standing alone while I'm saying this. But I know that some people will listen to this and maybe feel like, oh, no, 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 my family doesn't have that. What I know is that behind closed doors, nobody knows what's going on, right? So having a bright smile on your face and saying everything is fine is very much part of what I was conditioned to believe is the right way for you to behave. Don't let the neighbors know what you're doing. Don't let them know what you're thinking. Don't let them know what's really going on. Being really obsessed with what other people think about us and about you, and that you're representing the family. And so, whatever you do, if you do something naughty or stupid or whatever, you are going to make every one of us look bad. And so, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt, there is a lot of pressure to be a good girl. Right. So there's a lot of things that I only later when I started my meditation journey and my personal growth journey on myself, I understood had very negatively affected my relationship with myself and my relationship with my divine self. And I make that distinction of self and divine self because I think it's important for people to understand that there are several layers of self. There's the self that people see, self that you see here, this Black woman born in Zimbabwe born in apartheid, right? Born in a culture where of segregation and separation. That's why my family, had all of the issues that they had because for literally years and years in Africa, there has been a lot of abuse from white people to black people, right? And that's part of the history of these type of colonization countries where they come into a country, indoctrinate everyone onto their religious beliefs and also way of life, but at the same time they take charge, they take ownership of land, of how things operate. And so my family felt for sure there was some form of disempowerment that took place, right? And the opportunities for Black people in that time were always going to be less and not as advanced as what white people were allowed to do in Zimbabwe during that time that I was being born and brought up, and before I was born, and my great grandparents and grandparents and my ancestry and where I come from, right? So, religion was this religion of Roman Catholic coming from Rome, right? The idea that what the African people were doing to connect with their divine self or to connect with their essence, that wasn't valid, that stop doing what you're doing and do this. This is the better way. This is the way. So I feel like if you look at Africa, there's a lot of fragmentation because people have lost their traditional ideas of spirit, of connection to their divine, taken on in an extensive way, right? Taken on these new ideas. But then, if you look at the reality for most African people, they're living in extreme poverty. They're living in with poverty mindset, with lack, disempowered, and all of that stuff. So when I started this podcast, I wanted to be brave enough to ask powerful questions that most people don't want to ask or don't want to think about because it makes us uncomfortable, right? Especially when it comes to religion, because there's a lot of fear that you just need to follow what is being said or advised, right? There have been horrible consequences in the past to questioning, anything. There's been burning at the crosses. There's been, like just like horrible things that humans have done to each other in the name of religion. So there is a lot of fear on this topic, and that's why I had fear to, create a podcast called the Spiritual Rebel Podcast, where I wanted to address the important topic of how do humans evolve spiritually and where does religion play its part in that game of our evolution. And I think to understand the role of where religion plays its part, we do need to look back in the history, right? And then we need to look at the present moment where we are. And then we need to think about where do we want to go, right? So if I take my story from being from Zimbabwe, having people having come into having the English, and maybe before that was Spanish or whoever was there, but I believe it was just the English that that came to Zimbabwe. But I know that there's been Spanish people, there's been German people, colonizing Africa, right, and bringing religion, specifically Catholic Christianity, right? Christianity and the stories that come along with that. So I'm thinking that surely there is a place to ask the question, what was going on before Christianity took over Africa and what were people doing? I know that in the answer to that, there's a place where whatever they were doing could be up leveled and evolved because just because we're doing something doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. Africa and looking back at what happened in Africa and the colonization, whether the people who were doing what they were doing over there, what they were doing was it not necessarily bad. Maybe it wasn't the best thing, but still that was removed and replaced with something else. And what it's been replaced with is has some good aspects to it, like everything, but also has some negative aspects to it. And that's something that many people don't want to look into when we talk about religion, right? Like in everything that we experience and see on planet Earth, there is a duality that exists. So, for example, where there's good, there's bad. Where there's happy, there's sad, right? Where there's hot, there's cold. Where there's strong, there's weak. And so we have this duality that exists inside of the way that planet Earth operates. In every culture, like if you look at an Italian culture, Japanese culture, French culture, Chinese culture, there too you will find this, that there are some ideas that are beautiful and integral and in line with our most high human self and divine self. And then there are some ideas that are corrosive, that are not helpful, that are destructive even to our growth and our well being as a human race. It's not just on a religious level where we have also this problem, where in any religion, you're going to find the same thing, this duality. You're going to find that there are some great ideas, some really empowering, beautiful ideas. And then there are some other ideas that are less empowering, more shadow ideas, ideas that don't serve us anymore because we're living in 2025. We're living here now in this modern times. And there are things that are no longer relevant. They are even, as I said, destructive. I'll give you an example. So let's say in religious scriptures that talk against being gay, there is a belief that is wrong, that this is against the divine self, it's against God, it's against what is right. Even today, even still today on this planet, there are rules that this is wrong. And there are countries where you can still be put in jail or have some negative punishment because you are gay. And there's even people who are going to hear this podcast and be like, of course it's wrong. Mahima, like, what are you talking about? Like, are you nuts? Of course it's wrong, right? That's surprising to me because as I understand the connection to our divine self, it's really as operating as the highest version of yourself. Unconditional love, total acceptance of what is, compassion that every human, every animal, every plant, every tree is unique and has the right to be here and express itself in this world. There is a uniqueness in every single thing. Even a leaf there's no other leaf that looks the same, right? So there's this miraculous miracle that is what we see here on planet Earth. When I hear anything that speaks against another human that is born in a specific way and says that this isn't right, I feel like we need to examine this. But we're living in a time where we have that conflict of people have different beliefs, but where did these beliefs come from? They didn't just pop in people's heads. A human being is born without any belief systems. Nobody comes in here with a set of believing in what's right or wrong. We're taught that. We are taught what is right and we're taught what is wrong by our society, right? So if you have teaching that basically point toward outcasting certain groups of society and, saying this is wrong inside of institutions that are supposed to hold the highest level of integrity, love, and all of that juiciness, that's something I want to question. Yes. And I want it to be questioned not from a place of negativity, but from a place of evolution. We need to evolve. We need to evolve our thinking and how we see important things in life and other humans and the choices they make of how they want to be sexually. That's an important thing. And that we're fighting and arguing about some basic human rights is crazy to me. So I know that these are just my ideas, right? And I don't expect everyone to think the same as me. But that being said, we have a beautiful planet that needs our love, that needs us to wake the freaky fuck. Yes, I said that. Yeah, to wake the freaky fuck up and be better, be better humans. And in order to be better, we need to look at where we've come from and what we did in the past that was atrocious, terrible, not good, right? And we need to look at what were some of the belief systems that led us to do some of these things that we've done, right? And if we do not examine ourselves in an honest way, examine the institution of Christianity, examine the institution of any religion, and say what no longer serves us. And I know that there are people that want to be in this conversation and there are people that don't want to be in this conversation. They're like, no, there's nothing that needs to be changed. We're okay. Right. And I know that there are people that are looking for another way to practice their spirituality because they feel conflicted with some of the ideas. Now, some people are at peace. They figured out for themselves what they believe, what they don't believe, but maybe they don't have a communal place to go because there's an outcast that happens when you don't belong to the dialogue that everyone else is speaking, right? So if everyone believes that this is the way it is and you have another opinion, that's going to be an uncomfortable ride. So if you're in that situation, what do I suggest you do? I suggest you try to find people that are going to be able to support you think in the different way that you want to think. So that was something that I did once I discovered that my Roman Catholic upbringing had damaged me in some ways, right? It had tried to support me spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, but ultimately that is not what it did because I found myself extremely disconnected from any sense of connection to what one could call a divine self, right? I felt like and it wasn't just the Roman Catholic upbringing. That was definitely a very pivotal and strong part of it. But it was also my societal brainwashing, right? Coming from a culture where women need to be paid for, the family who will take a child, a woman child, from the family will need to pay something called a labola, right? And so if family has five daughters and two men, the family will collect from the husband's money. And it could be cows, it could be property, it could be something. And as a woman that's living in this day and age, I think that that is just wrong. Yeah. Now, it's not even about right or wrong because I don't even like to use the word wrong. I think we've evolved. There may have been a time where that was a helpful thing. Yeah. But now we're living in another time. And in this time, I don't think that this is an idea that should continue to be taught and positioned as, hey, this is a great idea, right? Like this is what we need as a society, right? And if you go to Zimbabwe, there's a lot of girls, young girls, that they don't even see a future for themselves because they have been already programmed from a young age that, listen, you are going to go to your husband and you're going to belong in a sense, right? Because they are going to pay for you. They're going to give us something and you are going to go over there and you belong now to that family and you need to take care and be with those people and show up and make us proud and make sure you're not doing anything that will shame the family and so forth and so on. So, and sometimes these girls are going into very bad situations. Like maybe there's some that go into lovely situations and maybe it works for them, but there's certainly a whole lot of these women that are going into very bad situations where they're being treated poorly and having negative experiences. But hey, that's part of our culture. That's part of what we do here. Toe the line, suck it up, get on with it, or else you will cause a lot of shame to the family. So there's a lot of things that are being said and done inside of societal and religious frameworks that I want with this podcast. I want to have the guts, I want to have the courage to say, let's talk about it. Yeah, let's talk about it. Have I been scared of the backlash that this could cause because there's people that have such strong beliefs that they're going to want to come at me? I have been, and that's why I haven't started this podcast sooner. But now I feel like I'm ready to just put myself out there, and because it feels like a calling from my soul, from my spirit. Yes, it feels like it's not coming from my head, I have to do this. It's coming from my heart to be in this conversation because I think humanity and humans need to up level. We need to get our thinking, our belief systems, our way of operating as a society, individual societies, individual countries, individual religions, and we need to find a way to come together on the same page. And this can only be done by honest storytelling. Honest storytelling. Tell your story, not the story that we want it to be. Yeah, of how great we all are and how great humans are and, and all of this stuff, but the real story, the story of the pain, disconnection, the disharmony that we have seen that's prevalent, even though we have had these tools like, for example, religion that's supposed to bring us to higher connection with ourselves. There has been abuse, there has been mismanagement of power, of money. We've just seen terrible things happen over centuries and centuries. Okay? It's time to understand why that's happening. And I think why it's happening is because of what I just said in this podcast. Some of what we have is beautiful and should be honored, and we should keep working with it. And some of what we are teaching, putting into the minds of young children is toxic and destructive, hasn't served us in the past, and it certainly is not serving us in the present. And unless we come up with a new way, we're going to keep repeating the past into the future. An opportunity to be honest with yourself about your culture and some of the, I will call them toxic for right now. Okay. We can work together to find better words if this triggers too much, but let's just call it for right now toxic ideas that no longer serve us. And that there are some of these toxic ideas inside of religious institutes that also need to be examined. And that it's just going to take one human at a time who's willing to be in a powerful conversation about the future of humanity, our sanity, and where do we actually start to grow together. And I think it's going to be through some form of a united spiritual front. Yes, a united spiritual front is a place where we, like we've done with everything else, we've evolved our idea. So we evolve our spirituality to find a common spiritual language. For example, reading and writing, right? That's a common language, whether you're reading in English or writing in Spanish. Like everyone agrees, reading and writing, good. And I think that there are more, there's a spiritual language that we could develop, spiritual language, which equals emotional intelligence language, which equals up leveling of our connection to each other, respect, and seeing each other, holding space for each other. But for that to happen, we would all need to take accountability for what needs transforming so that we can reach forward and co create a new spiritual evolution that's inclusive and that brings us in unity so that spirituality does not need to be off the table in any scenario, right? Because humans are going to fight about it. So let's not, you know, we have a board meeting and instead of bringing our spiritual selves, our divine self, our best self, our energetic highest self to the table, right? We've just become talking heads, disconnected from our spirituality, disconnected from our spiritual self, because that's what spirituality has become. It's become concepts and ideas in the minds of humans based on whatever we've, written in books and so forth, rather than a living vibrational movement that is evolving with us, with modern day time, and that's bringing us into deeper connection with each other, deeper bonding, and deeper respect, so that in those type of meetings, you can feel the spiritual aspect of humans as they gather for a board meeting, as they gather for, whatever we're doing, that we're doing it from that place of connected to ourselves. So that's my hope. I have a dream. Okay. I have a dream that one day humans will sit together in harmony with each other, nature, and all that is divine in the world, that we come together spiritually and vibe and create more beauty in the world. That's my dream, and that's the purpose of this podcast, to be brave, to have conversations of how the freak are we going to do that. So guys, share this podcast. That's it for today. It's a wrap. If you are ready to start moving your spiritual evolution to the next level, then read the show notes and see what kind of courses I am doing that offer you the possibility to learn more about all of this and start having your own breakthroughs into divine connection with yourself. Love, peace, and joy to be in this conversation. Thank you for listening and see you next week on the same place, Spiritual Rebel Podcast, where we are going to blow our own minds and spread more love and joy into the world. Mwah! Love. Bye. Love, love, love.